Can we all see my screen? Anybody?
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Okay, cool. Let me just. Okay. So let's see. I'm just gonna start. Okay, so yeah, like I said, this is going to be a general overview of the application process. This is PreMD, kind of started as a way for current med students to help prospective med students deal or like maneuver through the application process, because if any of you have like already started to look at what's involved, it can be a lot and it can be pretty overwhelming. So yeah, this is kind of our hope is to kind of make the process a little easier and help prospective students with the process. So I'm going to go to this. So this is a pre and post session survey. So for this portion, I was hoping to give y'all maybe like 2 minutes to scan the QR code and take the surveys. If you do the surveys, there is like a raffle for a Kaplan like online Kaplan class that we are giving away for someone through like this lottery. So as it says on here, it expires at the end of this year. So we're hoping to have this turn around pretty quickly and give it to one of you. So I'm going to just kind of pause at this point and give y'all a couple minutes to fill the survey out. All right, so I will continue on. We have the QR code later in the slides, so if you don't get a chance to do it now, it'll pop back up and you can do it then. Also, these slides are going to be posted, and so you should have access to this as well. Moving right along. So this is kind of just like a roadmap of the upcoming sessions that we're planning. So as you can see, there's like more detailed aspects of the application process that we're hoping to go into, just because like all of these different parts can take up a decent amount of time. And yeah, if you're interested in these, we will have these sessions available, and very similar to this, y'all can hop on and kind of we'll go into more of the nitty-gritty details of these topics. Those are all to be determined, but we will keep you all updated. So this is the application cycle timeline. It's a rough estimate. Obviously, like everyone's timeline is going to look different, and what's going to be like most conducive to your schedule. And so this is kind of just like a general template. So starting in January to about June, July is kind of like the recommended period that a lot of people take the MCAT in. I personally took mine like in the September before the application year. So like it's highly variable, and it's kind of up to when you feel ready and when you're able to kind of fit in the study time. But the primary application for AMCAS opens in June. And so that's kind of like the big first deadline to be aware of. And there's a lot of work that kind of comes before that point, which we're going to go over later in this presentation. And so usually it opens like late May, early June. And like the biggest piece of advice that I got when I was applying was just like try to get your application in early. Don't like sacrifice the quality of your application, but just like definitely try to like keep that early June deadline in mind. And then usually there's a little bit of a pause or like break. And it's like the point between when you submit and when you start hearing back for secondary apps. And this is also the time when you'll start doing certain like tests like Casper. There's like the situational judgment test through AAMC. They're basically just like tests that deal with like moral or ethical questions. They're a little not tricky, but they're like a lot they're a lot different than like the MCAT. They're nothing really like the MCAT. So it's just something to be aware of. Something to look into when you're making your schools list is just like some schools require them, a lot of them don't, but it's always good to know just so you are keeping up with these deadlines. And then interviews start rolling in usually mid to early August, and those can go through the rest of the year. This timeline says the end of December, but those can come as late into like the spring. For example, I didn't get an interview to Anschutz until like late January. So it's highly variable, and just because you don't get anything in the early months, like don't let that bring you down. But yeah, so that's kind of like, this is like the very general outline of kind of what to expect. And we're going to move on. So this next portion is kind of going to talk about the big things to do like pre-primary. So this is kind of be like on the large scale over the course of like the years leading up to you applying. Obviously, for those of you who are applying this upcoming application cycle, this might be a little less relevant than those who are like, sophomores in undergrad right now, because you have the time to kind of build this up. But some of the things that like typical things you think of when you hear like about a pre-med is either like shadowing, scribing, doing volunteer work in a hospital, doing research, whether that's like clinical research or like wet lab research. A lot of people in our class were like CNAs, EMTs. There were some nurses. Obviously, that's like a different career, but that all adds to like the experience that you have. But ultimately, I would say like the biggest thing is just like make sure that you are participating in things that you're passionate about and that are going to be like easy to write about because you are passionate about. I think one of the biggest things for the application is just like trying to kind of string together a story that explains who you are and kind of highlights the passions that you have both in and out of medicine. And so it shouldn't be so much of like a checking boxes off, but just kind of things that you think would just kind of show who you are as a person, while also conveying like a passion that you have. Tip for this is to keep a journal, just because again, this is over like a longer span. And so the things you did maybe freshman or sophomore year of undergrad, you're not going to remember like how many hours and like who was the contact person. So like it's good to write this stuff down as you're doing it, just because when this stuff comes up as you're doing the primary, it'll make your life a lot easier. And then I think the big thing through these activities also is just, again, to document them and then to try to figure out ways that it like can intersect into being a physician, even for things that you don't necessarily think that aren't like entirely medicine related. There's like usually a way that you can tie it in to like either a skill, like transferable skill, or like a lesson that you learned that you think will make you a better doctor because of it. So again, it doesn't have to be so cookie cutter. It can be what you are passionate about. And then kind of getting to that period closer to the opening of the primary application. Again, the MCAT is something that you definitely should have squared away. The earlier the better, just because it kind of gives you an idea of like ballpark schools that you would be like a good fit for. with that being said, like test scores aren't everything, and like don't let it be the thing that like keeps you from applying to certain places or keeps you from like thinking that you couldn't apply to a certain med school. But for me personally, it was nice to like know that I had that out of the way and that I had like a rough score estimate that like I knew was somewhere within these ranges. Everyone's going to study different. Some people will do self-studying. Some people will do like guided classes, do like Kaplan or Princeton Review. It's honestly whatever works for you and your schedule, especially if you're like taking gap years. People work 9 to 5s. Like personally, I was working in 9 to 5 when I studied the MCAT. So like I did self-paced and I just fitted around that. Letters of rec are also a really big part of the application. And for me personally, they were one of the more stressful things just because it's like one of the things that's like out of your control. So I think like the biggest thing is to give your letter writers enough time. Personally, I started asking my letter writers in January and just reaching out to them in January. And some of them took like 3 weeks to a month to reply before they even said yes or no. So the more time you give yourself, the better. And for them too, it's going to make it less stressful for them and give them time to write, a meaningful letter. And again, this is kind of variable depending on like if you're still in school or if you've taken time off. I personally took 3 gap years between school and med school. And so like reaching out to these professors after was a little rusty, or like it was a long time. And so I usually try to like throw something in the email that would like remind them or refresh them of who I was or class that I took with them. And the last point here listed, Interfolio, it's like a third-party site that can store your letters before you send them to AMCAS, which again is nice if you are going to take some time between like graduating or having that class with the professor and the time that you apply to school. So that's something you can use. And then for the personal statement and activities, it's a good idea to start like jotting kind of big things that you want to talk about in your personal statement and kind of getting the activities that you feel like you want to talk about. There is like a limit to the activities. So it's good to kind of narrow it down what you think is going to allow you to kind of show who you are best through your application. And so that's something you can get started on now. And then at this point, we're gonna open it up to some other med students if they have any comments about like gap years or hobbies or anything at this point.
Yeah, I can hop in. My name's Morgan McCord. I'm a first year like Jacob at CU. And I was actually just kind of typing some of this out. So this came in at a really good time. Just kind of about gap years. I graduated college in 2018 and I was planning to take 1 gap year and then apply to med school and get in and, start my career. And the MCAT was a bigger hurdle than I was expecting. I was very naive going into it. I dedicated I thought I was going to study for 1 month and then take it and then be fine. And that just simply was not the case. So I took it, I was naive. Then I took it again when I knew I wasn't ready. And just a reminder, there are no miracles that happen on the MCAT. If you do not see your score that you want on a practice test, it is a very small chance that you're going to see that on the day of the exam with all the added stress, the pressure. They put you in this little cube and the miracles don't happen. So just make sure you're ready. Make sure you see the score that you want before you go in there that day. But overall with my gap year, so I was planning on 1, I ended up taking 3 and everything was fine. I thought that everyone was going to be ahead of me and I was going to go to school with a lot of people who were younger than me. And I think our average age in our class is 25. And I wouldn't change anything about what I learned in those years. I feel like I got more experience with patients, more experience with doctors. I grew up some. And so it was all positive experience. So I just want to make sure that people don't think of gap years as a bad thing. I think they're very positive and it gives you time to really kind of make sure that this is a career for you. And then now in class, like I'm very thankful to be there. And it's just it's made the experience even better.
Hey everyone, so I'm Austin. I'm also an MS1 like Jacob and Morgan. So in terms of writing about your hobbies for the application, I really can't stress enough that um, doing things that I said, doing things that add joy and meaning to your life and writing about those definitely makes for a very strong application. Admissions committees in schools, they're very good at telling when you've done something just to like check off a box. And if you write about that or talk about that during your interview, it is pretty easy for them to, see through that. For me, in my or in my primary application, for my most meaningful experiences, two of what I put weren't even related to medicine. I talked about music and I talked about doing Dragon Boat in college. And I was able to just write much stronger statements about how those impacted me and how those kind of represented me as a person. And then during interviews, when I talked about those things, I was, able to come off as much more passionate, and I was able to actually speak and show interest in those things, and not just come off as someone who did X amount of research, did X amount of volunteering, just to fill in a checklist of things. So definitely don't think that like you have to have only science related stuff in your most meaningful experiences, or when you're interviewing, or when you're talking about your primary application. Med schools want to know who you are, not just as a science student. They want to know who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think everything they said, I totally agree with. Gap years came in clutch. I think a lot of people in our class took gap years, a lot of like personal development. A lot of people in our class, or at least like a handful, have had like full careers before they even decided to go to medicine. There's somebody in our class who was a librarian, and now they're here with us. So yeah, do it you're passionate about. It'll definitely come across in your application. At this point, we are going to go into the primary application portion. So this is kind of like you did all like the groundwork and like the pre-application work, and then this is kind of like during the actual when it opens. And so something that I think is very helpful is just like being very proactive with all of the different components of the application. It's a long application and it can be pretty overwhelming. Even like the easy parts, like filling in your grades, like you would think it's just kind of like, oh, like I took this class, I got an A. It's just like you have to enter each one like one by one, ordering like an unofficial transcript, but like something that you have that can like you could put your grades in. It's like something that I did that was helpful for me. But yeah, writing out your personal statement, and writing out your extracurriculars and your activities, starting to fill out the AMCAS. Again, there's a lot of information that's like not even anything med school related. It's like your upbringing, your parents, like where you went to high school, like all of these like random things. And it can take a while, especially if like this is not the only thing that you're doing. An important thing to like realize also is that AMCAS, it takes a while for them to process your application. And so like it says here, it can take up to 8 weeks. And this is definitely variable depending on what point in the application season it is. And so I think that's why the most common tip that I heard was like, try to get it in early, because then you're like not sitting in a like waiting line of them even processing it. You're kind of like at the front of the line. And so when AMCAS does send out the primary applications to the school, you're kind of in like that first batch. And the point, there is like a kind of delay, even if you submit your application on like the very first day it opens, AMCAS doesn't send any applications out. I think it's for like 3 weeks. And so even if you're like front of the line, submit it the first day it opened, it will still take some time for them to check all the information, check the transcripts, all of that stuff. And before they shoot it all over to all the schools that you applied to. And so this is a little bit of the information on the cost of applying. It is a very expensive process. And one might say too expensive, but this is kind of like the breakdown of what you're looking at. The primary application, it's $170 for the first school, and then for every school that you apply to after that, it's $43. And so I know some people apply to like a handful of schools, some people apply to like 30, 40 schools. and then, others are like a sweet spot in between. I personally applied to 22 schools. And so definitely can add up quickly. And then again, you are met with secondaries. And so if you're not familiar with just like primary and secondary, primary is like the one application you do through MCAS and send out. And then each school will send you a secondary application. A lot of schools usually send it. There are very few schools that have like actual hard cutoffs of like GPA or anything like that. So, a lot of secondaries start to come in. And those also range between $50 to $150 that you will be paying to send them back. And then again, another component of the financial part of this is interview travel. I know it's been a little bit different these last few years because of COVID, and a lot of medical schools were virtual, especially like when I was applying, everything was virtual. And I know this application season, just kind of like hearing from admissions and other med schools, like a lot of the virtual format is currently still staying. But it's, I think, something that they like med schools will probably revisit like year by year. And if that does come back for like in-person interviews, that's definitely something to consider. Airfare, staying somewhere like a hotel or Airbnb, that all can add up pretty quickly. And so, yeah, the total cost, depending on how many schools you apply to, can definitely get into the thousands. A really great program is the fee assistance program. And it helps to kind of offset a lot of these costs, especially for like low income applicants. And so it's something, if you think that you qualify, or even if maybe you don't think, it's something definitely worth looking into at least. And it's not just like waivers for these things. They give you like access to prep materials, and they either waive completely or like at least part of your MCAT fee. And they also give you access to I think it's called the MSAR, which is like the medical school like search engine basically. And it has like all of the medical school's information, application stats, requirements. And that is also something that is really useful if you haven't taken a look at that. Even if you don't apply for this, I think it's like $20 or $30, like a 1-year subscription. Definitely worth the investment. It has like all the relevant information that you need. And it was really, it came in really handy when I was applying. And so moving on, the next big portion of the MCAS application is the personal statement. And so this is about 5,300 characters, and it's a very vague or like general, like, why do you want to go to medical school prompt. And so it gives you a lot of like freedom to write about what you want. The big thing is that it should be personal. Don't, like this says, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. I would say like the caveat to that is like, don't just like write a sob story, but kind of like make sure that you have like a tie-in to medicine, and let them, like the person who's reading this should know by the end of it, like, wow, this person really wants to go into medical school. And they've shown me that through this story or this life experience. This is definitely something that like you don't write once and you send off. Like you do multiple drafts, usually send it to people that you trust and that you think will give good advice, people that know you really well, because those are going to be the ones that'll tell you like, yeah, this is really authentic and like it's you, versus like someone who doesn't know you and they're not going to be able to give you really valuable feedback. For the work and activity section, this is where you get to write about your like pre-med activities. And so you have up to 15 spaces to fill with activities. They all have a character limit of 700. 3 of these spaces or these activities you'll get to like designate as like most meaningful. And so you'll get an additional 1325 characters to like write about why that was meaningful to you. This, again, you also need information, and this is where that journal comes in handy to give like the dates you did it, how many hours, when you did it, who was the like the person of the contact person that you can put, whether it's like a phone number or an email. And I would say that for this one, it's important to explain like how this like either impacted your decision to go into med school, or like what you learned from it, a skill, anything that can like tie back to medicine, I think is important. an update for this current year is that you can now put in things for like anticipated experiences. And so if you have something that you haven't yet started, but will start over the course of the application process, you can put that in. Another thing too, is that like a lot of people, when they're applying, if they're currently doing something, you can like put in like the end date being something that you expect. If you expect to do it until like June of next year and you're applying in like July, you can still put like you're going to be doing it till June and like estimate the amount of hours that you will be doing that. And these are like the big general categories that you can like every activity you do, you'll have to like categorize it. And so these are some of the like categories that you can put. As you can see, there's a pretty wide range of things. And if for some reason it doesn't fall under any of these, you can just put it as other. A tip I would say is just like to kind of make sure that you have like a pretty even spread of things. Don't just do like one, don't just throw in like, I don't know, only leadership. Like try to spread out, you know, teaching, publications, employment, leadership, like try to make sure you have like a pretty well-rounded application in terms of the activities that you're doing. And then this is another opportunity if anyone in the class has anything that they want to comment on this.
I can kind of give a little bit on my primary app. So I guess starting with the personal statement, I kind of struggled at first I was thinking like I need something big that kind of can jump off the page, or like some crazy experience that happened to me that made me really know that I wanted to be a physician. And I didn't have that. So it kind of took a process of understanding the little things and the little experiences that I had that made such a really big impact on my decision to become a physician. So some of the best advice that I received on the personal statement was kind of finding the meaning and the purpose in some of the most mundane things. So I worked as a CNA and telling stories, like just stories about conversations with patients. And, it wasn't anything crazy. Like it wasn't a code where someone was dying and I had to be like a hero. But it was just having a normal conversation with a patient in a hard time that I think made a big impact on the patient and it made a really, really big impact on me. So I think like you don't have to have this crazy story that's going to jump off the page. I think if it has meaning and it can kind of demonstrate that you've put a lot of thought into why you want to become a physician, like that's going to go a long way.
I can kind of go off Brendan there. I think reading example personal statements are very helpful in kind of seeing their structure, kind of what other people decided to include. Some of the books that we're going to recommend, I'm sure they have examples in there. But a point of that I really struggled with was it's good to use them as examples, but try not to compare yourself to other people. Your story is going to be different. It's going to be unique. It's going to be great. And the examples are like the best of the best that have like the craziest stories, which is awesome. But don't use them as a comparison. Your story is just as good as theirs. And just know that it's unique and that's what they want to hear.
Yeah, I think they said it very well. So moving on to the MD PhD. So this is like a still an MD degree, but this is something it's like a joint degree that people who usually are interested in research will think about pursuing. And so this takes about 7 to 8 years to complete. So it is definitely a longer time commitment. And like the slide says, it's a lot of time dedicated to research. And so it's usually people who were in undergrad who had projects, research projects, or who are just heavily involved in research and think that this would be a great like continuation of that. And so for this one, it is a little different in the sense that there are 2 additional essays describing why you're interested specifically in this dual degree program, and then to explain your research experiences. And so for this, you actually need to have had research experience. The regular MD program, like research is not like a hard requirement. I never stepped foot in a wet lab or a research group team, and here I am. So, but for MD PhD, it's definitely something that is important and required. And this is the general timeline. As you can see, it's roughly similar to the MD timeline, maybe just like some slight shifts. And then this is a link that can give you more information about this, or also if you just like Google MD PhD AAMC, I'm sure you'll get plenty of things to come back. Just like another thing, the general structure of this varies, but like for here, I know a lot of people, I think they do the first 3 years of the medical, like the MD program, and then they go and do their research, finish that, and then they come back for that last year of the MD program. And so it's like med school, research, and then finish it off with med school. And so that's kind of the structure that we have here. This is a little deviation from the AMCAS application. So this is the application for DO schools. And so it's going to have some similarities to AMCAS, but there are definitely some differences. And so last year it opened a little bit before the AMCAS application. And for this one, the personal statement, again, is the same character length. The letters of rec are going to be submitted to every school that you apply to. And for this, like a strong tip, or like it's encouraged that at least one of your letters of rec comes from a DO doc. And so that's something to consider if you are considering DO schools. The activities are a little shorter. You get 600 characters, but there's no limit on the amount of activities that you can do. And then just this influences section. The costs, again, is very similar to the AMCAS, $198 first, $50 for each additional, and there are fee waiver available. And then again, the secondaries also have a fee associated to them. So just kind of keep that in mind for these as well. DO schools are just as, great as MD schools. And so if this is something that you are considering, or you think you've done research and would be interested in, it's a great option. And so the other additional application that there is Texas. For some reason, she does things a little different. And so this application is separate. And again, it opens a little bit before the AMCAS application. And so this one, you have a personal essay, which is a little shorter than the AMCAS and the DO application. And so, there's going to be a lot of crossover in like this application. If you apply to like DO, MD, and Texas, you can definitely use like a template or like the bones of a personal statement, but you will need to do some editing to get it down to that character limit. There are 2 additional essays for this application. And these are kind of just some like more details about the MCAT and the activities, as far as like the character length and things like that. This works a little bit different than other schools in the sense of like it's like a match system as opposed to like getting an acceptance and then like ultimately choosing where you want to go. So it's a little different in that way as well. And the ideal thing for this is that there's a flat fee of $200 for applying to these schools. And so there is no fee waiver available, but it is a little bit more financially feasible to apply. And yeah, so now we are going to move on through to the post-primary application portion. So as you have all probably realized, like the application process is quite extensive, and it is definitely a long process that is easy, and it's easy to get fatigued or like discouraged as you go through it. So I think just like knowing what is to come both before, during, and after the process is really important and can help you kind of set yourself up for success. So this first point is probably like the biggest thing that I would recommend is to start writing out your secondary questions like as soon as you can. It's pretty easy. One being that like most schools repeat their secondary questions year after year. And so you can go onto like Reddit or like Student Doctor Network, these like third-party kind of sites, and people have like put almost every single application or every single med school and their secondary questions on these websites. And so you can pull those and start writing those secondary applications or questions. Like I said, a lot of schools send back secondaries. It's quite common for a lot of people to get secondaries back. And so I was kind of reading through the chat, and I think Olivia mentioned that it can get very overwhelming very, very quickly, especially when you're getting like all of these secondaries back from schools like right after another. And so, yeah, I think the sooner you can get started writing these secondary questions, the better off you'll be, the less stressed you'll be, the more time you'll have to, write meaningful responses to these. Each school is going to vary. Some schools will send you one secondary application and give you like 6,000 characters and be like, tell me your life from birth to now. Other ones are going to give you like 3 questions, and it's going to be like, tell me your favorite song, and like, what would you do if you had $1,000 and a free day off of work? Like, they can range from like the most meaningful things to like things like, what's your favorite plant, or like, yeah, so wide range of questions that they can ask you. And comment on Student Doctor Network. It's very nice for this because it has all these resources. Other than that, I would say stay off of it as much as you can. It's really easy to start spiraling and like reading everyone's responses, and like everyone's like, yeah, I have 10,000 hours of shadowing and I've cured cancer, and like you're here getting stressed because you think that your application's not good or what have you. Yeah, great for this resource. Otherwise, I would try to stay off it as much as you can. And then Casper, Snapshot, and Duet. These are the like tests that we mentioned earlier. And a lot of schools don't have these. I think out of the 22 schools I applied to, there was like 4 that required it. And so it's definitely not like everyone's doing it. And this information is usually pretty easy to find for the schools that you're applying to. Most schools will have like an application like overview webpage, and this will usually be in there. I think I saw someone mention it in the chat earlier as well. This is like really not a test that you study for. It's kind of just like you answer these questions, you do your best, stay calm, try to think through these in the best way that you can. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, your application is comprehensive and it's holistic. And like, if you don't perform as well as you think you would have wanted to in these like situational tests, it's not the end of the world. And another thing for post-primary, once the secondaries start rolling in and you send those out with fingers crossed, you'll start getting some interviews sent back to you. And so prepping for those interviews is just as important. Interviews are a great way for the school to get to know you more than just what's on paper. And so practicing these like mock interviews, if you're still an undergrad or any type of school that has like a career center, usually they will be able to offer you like mock interviews. If you have any, even if it just comes down to like having friends ask you questions and like being able to sit there, articulate and formulate your question or your responses to these things. Again, you can look up, there's plenty of websites that will have like mock interview style questions, and you can just like rapid fire, go through these questions, start to like formulate responses that you can always just pull from. And again, interviewing, if it stops being virtual, is definitely a cost to consider. So just have that in the back of your head as you're going through the application process. And yeah, kind of very similar to the secondaries, just kind of have like very general, like a bank of responses to common interview questions. It'll really help you flow and kind of be concise and prepared for your interview day. Yeah, kind of this is what I was talking about. Student Doctor Network. So like if you Google the school name that you are applying to and Student Doctor Network, you can usually get like a whole list of all the responses for the secondary questions from the previous year. Example being CU School of Medicine. So like this was the prompt that we had. It was I don't think it says a character limit here, but I think it was like around like 4,000 or 5,000 characters. And it was like, writing responses to these. Some secondaries are going to be very vague. Some of them are going to be very specific. It kind of just ranges. Another tip that I would give for secondaries is that a lot of secondaries have like crossovers, like schools will send literally the same secondary. And so it's very helpful in that sense that you can sometimes do a little bit of copying and pasting, or if not copying and pasting, at least like using one as kind of like a skeleton to answer another school secondary. So that's a tip that I found very useful, because there's not a hard rule usually when it comes to secondaries, but I try to get my secondaries out within a 2 to 3 week time span from when I receive them. Obviously, that's not 100% feasible sometimes if you're working or if you have life events that kind of were unexpected, but just a general timeline of kind of returning the secondaries back to the school. And this is kind of just a general list of questions that you can kind of expect to see, like, how do you contribute to diversity? Why our school? I think this one came up a lot, the like, why our school? And so I think if you're like me and you made a school list and didn't necessarily think 100% of like, why do I want to go to the school before you start your secondaries, it might be a good idea to go back and kind of figure out that question, whether that's like the curriculum, certain clubs, certain opportunities. It could be anything, but just, be able to answer that question. Also for the interview, that's a very common question to come up during interviews. But yeah, this is kind of a list of general questions. If you like don't really have a good place to start as far as like writing out sample questions, this is like a very, I think, common list of questions that you'll see. And again, you can go on Student Document Network and they will have endless lists of secondaries to write. And yeah, so if anybody also has any tips or stories for secondary stuff.
I can just say that like post primary application, in terms of preparing for interviews, asking for help is crucial. Doing mock interviews with people that have either been through the process or have done a lot of mock interviews is super helpful. It's probably one of the most important things you can do. It people can tweak your answers. You can practice, how you want to approach things, and they'll pick up on tics or habits that you have that you might not even be aware of. And again, the whole point of mock interviews is you want to make all your mistakes and mess up everything during your mock interviews, that when you get to your actual interview, you can, ace it without having the fear of doing something for the first time.
Hey, I've been looking. I'm a third year. I'm chiming in on video because I think this is really important. So when I actually helped design this slide last year, and that first line was one that I put in, I have helped a lot of med school applicants with their personal statement, write about their meaningful experiences, this, that, and the other. And one thing that everybody does is they get my feedback or the feedback from somebody else. And like, one of my really good friends is really awful about it. Like the first thing he does is he poo-poos whatever I've said. Oh, well, yeah, I get that, but like, this is why my situation is different, or like this other person didn't think that was an issue. And it's like, if you are asking for help, accept the help. Feedback can be very difficult to hear, but it is a gift. And the people who are giving it to you want nothing more than to see you succeed. Even if what they say basically says like, hey, wait a year and try harder, do better, however they say it, it really hurts to hear that. But these are people who are trying to make sure that you have the best shot of doing this right, hopefully the first time. So if you need to thank them, take a few days, sit with it, breathe. It's not the end of the world. But if you are going to ask somebody for help, make sure you are willing to accept that help.
I actually had that exact thing happen to me. So like my advisor told me, like at CU, I don't think you're going to get into your top schools, or like, and the application process is, as she put it, soul crushing. So I only want you to have to do this one time. So really like take that year, build your application, your resume, and make it really, really the best that it can be for you. And that was really hard to hear because I was kind of like ready to go. in like early May, but it was the best advice that she could have given me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they both brought up great points. I think kind of what they touched on. Yeah, the process is long and it is hard. And so I think another important thing that we don't necessarily like write explicitly in this presentation is like, take care of yourself during this application process. It's going to be long. You're going to be writing essays like day after day after day. And just when you think it's like a perfect personal statement, someone's going to send it back to you and be like, edit this. And it's okay to be like frustrated and kind of like tired, but just like take the time to like kind of like refill or recharge your battery. I know for myself, I gave myself like 1 day a week where I just like didn't do any secondaries. I didn't think about the AMCAS application. I just did whatever I wanted to do. So like, yeah, it's like kind of, it's only 1 year, but it feels like a marathon. Like you have to really have the stamina to get through the application process. And also just another point of like, you ideally only want to have to do this once, but like, if you don't get in the first time, it is like more than okay. And there are plenty of people in our class and in any class across, the country, like plenty of people are reapplicants. If you don't get in during that time, you go and you make your application stronger, you take feedback, you do what you need to do, and you come and you apply the next cycle. It feels scary, kind of what Morgan was saying in the beginning, like our average class age is 25. There are people in our class who are in their 30s and their 40s. Like, I think there's an MS2 who's like, he was a music teacher. He was a vet. Like he had like a whole life before coming to see you. So like, if you have to reapply, it's not the end of the world. Obviously it's not ideal. But if this is something you're truly passionate about, don't let that discourage you, and definitely reapply. So, this is just a list of kind of helpful resources that we thought would be important to include. Again, if you like RSVP'd, you should have gotten a copy of this. And if not, I think Lauren was gonna email this out if you provided your contact information. And this lecture will be recorded and posted onto our website. And so you can have access to this video and come to the slide and see any of these resources. But yeah, these are kind of just things that we talked about throughout this presentation. The MSAR was the thing I was telling you about earlier, I think is like a great place to start if you have no idea where you want to apply. It has like all the information, even information that you like didn't think would be relevant to list in like a med school like information deck. Yeah, really cool. And yeah, at this point, I think I will put this up here again. Again, this is, if you joined a little later, we have this QR code. If you can scan it and take the pre and post survey, it'd be really helpful and beneficial for us on how to improve and kind of get your thoughts on some certain things. And if you complete the pre and post survey, we will enter you in a raffle for a sorry, I'm blinking, for an MCAT class from Kaplan. The class needs to be redeemed by the end of this year. So we're hoping to have that turnaround and, pick someone fairly soon. So again, I will just leave this up here. If no one had the chance to complete the survey, you can do that now. And I think at this point, we had kind of planned, if there was the opportunity to go into like breakout rooms and have people answer or ask questions and kind of go into smaller rooms with current med students, so we can kind of field those questions a little better and answer those for you. So Spen.
Yeah, I'll give everyone a couple seconds to scan the QR code and fill out the survey, and I'll open up the rooms and just go ahead and join. Hopefully this is just a good way for you guys to get like maybe some more specific questions that are like more that pertain more to like your own situation answered. And I try to make sure everybody's split. If you don't get an invite, you're just going to stay in this main meeting room, and there'll be a couple med students staying in here as well. that can answer your questions.